Hi, I'm Harvey Miller, and we are back with the second part of our lecture on aggregate planning. All right. So in our last lecture, we sort of ended up talking about a number of options that we can use to develop an aggregate plan, but that typically the mixed approach tends to give us better performance. So let's look at some methods for aggregate planning. There's a graphical method, which is a popular technique. It's easy to understand and to use, and then you could use some trial and error approaches. Do not guarantee that you get the optimal solution, but it only requires some limited computations, all right? So graphical methods, what you do is you determine the demand for each period. You determine the capacity for regular time, overtime, and subcontracting in each period. Find labor costs, hiring costs, and inventory holding costs. Consider the company's policy in terms of whether the company doesn't want inventory to exceed a certain amount, doesn't want to use more than a certain amount of undertime or overtime, does not want to use more than a certain amount of subcontracting. So the company may have a number of policies, and you have to now consider these policies when you are developing the actual plan itself. So let's take a look at an example. Here is a case where we have the demand for the next 6 months for a roofing supplier. The expected demand is 900 in January, 700 units in February, March, and so on, for a total of 6,200 units. If we look at the number of production days available in each period, it adds up to 124 days. So we could actually determine the daily demand, right? And you could see that the daily demand is it fluctuates. It fluctuates. So we could say, all right, we know the daily demand fluctuates, but if we take the total amount of time that we have available to us and we divide it by the total demand, or we actually divide the total demand by the total number of days available to us, we have here 50 units per day is the average requirement, 50 units per day. So that means that we need to have capacity that averages out to 50 units per day. Well, how do we get that? So this is where you would have to look at your labor force, you'd have to look at the options for subcontracting, etc., and see what you can do. But how you use those options will depend on their costs, okay? So one of the things that you can do to help you with the graphical method is to now plot. As you can see here from this diagram, there's a plot of the actual demands, right? So if I were to go back here, 41, 39, 38, 50, 41, 39, 38, I think, and this is what, 57, 68, 55, 68 and 55. So you could decide now, this is the demand pattern. What are we going to do in terms of our production? So if you're now going to produce, you're going to have to say, okay, let's look at where this red line is right here. That's an example where if we want to keep production constant at 50 units per day, well, look at what will happen. If we kept it constant at 50 units per day, then we see that here, this is inventory because our production exceeds our demand. Inventory. But look at how we have excess demand here. And so that inventory is going to go to satisfy that demand, right? So at the end of the day, what will happen is that we'll end up carrying inventory for 3 periods, but then we start to use up that, not 3, maybe even more than that. We start to use up that inventory as we get demand that is higher than the production rate. The excess demand is satisfied from the inventory itself. Okay, so in a case like that, you would look at your cost information, the cost of carrying a unit of inventory per month, subcontracting if you decide to subcontract instead of carrying inventory, average pay rate per worker, online pay rate, overtime, sorry, pay rate, not online, labor hours to produce a unit, 1.6 hours per unit, cost of increasing, and then we have the average pay rate is $10 per hour or $80 per day. If you know the, if you have 8 hours per day, then in a case like that, you could determine what the daily output of a worker is. So it gives you a sense of how many workers you need to have to meet a particular production rate. All right. And then cost of increasing the daily production rate. If you want to increase it, you're going to increase some hiring and training costs. If you're going to lower it, then you're going to incur some costs that are associated with separation. All right. So this is sort of showing us how we could actually how the cost will actually be incurred by simply keeping the rate constant at 500 per day, and then not 550 per day, and then seeing what we actually produce. So production of 50 units per day for 22 days will make this much: 1100, 900 for 18 days, 1050, 1050, 1100, and then 1000. But this is the demand. So you can see if our demand is lower than our production, then we were going to have inventory. So we're going to have 200 units, right? So there we go. Ending inventory is 200. Then we go over here to the next period, another 200. So our ending inventory is going to be 400. Then we have 250 be the difference between 1050 and 800 is 250. So now we're increasing our inventory. However, now we notice that our production is less than the demand. It's actually 150 units less. So we are going to change the inventory level by 150. 150 take out from 650 will now give us, we have 500 left. Then we have a difference of 400 between our production and our demand. And that 400 will reduce the 500 down to 100 units. And then in the last instant, we are short 100, where this 100 units is going to actually help us. And now our ending inventory is 0. All right. So now what we got to do is to say, okay, this looks good. Let us go ahead and calculate our costs. So the total units of inventory carried from 1 month to the next was 1850. You would have to add up, I believe, all of that here. 1850 units of inventory. Workforce required to produce 50 units per day was 10 workers. All right. And we could actually calculate that. So for this particular example, the inventory carrying costs would be 1850 units multiplied by $5 per unit. The regular labor is the 10 workers produce times $80 per day times the 124 days, which is the total number of days in that planning period. Did we have any overtime? No. Did we have any layoffs? No. So the total cost of our aggregate plan is really the cost of carrying inventory and our regular labor, full-time labor costs. So that gives us a total cost of $108,450. So what are some options available to us? Well, we could have tried to match the demand on a chase strategy by hiring a lane of workers, and then that would give us another plan. We could have tried to use overtime in some periods. Maybe what we do is in the periods that are low demand, we determine, let's keep the workforce at a certain level, and then we could then use overtime to rather than using inventory, we could then use overtime. So again, I'm sorry, this trying to come up with the the plan is, you could do a bit of trial and error, but you could actually use Excel and Solver in Excel to help you find the optimum quantity that you need. Okay, so let's look at, this is just showing you a graphical representation. So if we were to take our production, since we're keeping it constant at 50 units per day, then the red line would represent our production, right? So at the end of 124 days, we would have produced 6,200 units. And it's just a straight line because the slope is constant at 50 units per day. However, because our demand changes, if we do the cumulative demand, that's what is going to look like here. So in this period, between, let me just go down here, up to about maybe the middle of March into early April, what we're seeing is that we are going to be carrying inventory, right? This area right here, let me put that in red. We are carrying inventory because why? Because the production is higher than the demand. Now, when the production is lower than the demand, we are now going to be consuming the inventory. So the inventory is going to be reduced. And that's what we're going to have in this particular situation. All right? So this is just showing you the graphical approach. And now you could draw different graphs. You could decide, well, what if I wanted to do something like this? What if I wanted my production to be something like here and here? So notice what would happen if I wanted my production to be here and here. It means that I'm basically going to keep my production level constant for a particular period, and then I'm going to increase it. But if my production is always lower than, if my production is always lower than the demand, then it means that I am going to end up having to back order, right? Production is lower than the demand, so I'm going to have to end up back ordering or something. So all of a sudden now I'm going to increase my production rate to sort of catch up. So to catch up all these back orders that I have allowed to build up. So all of this here would be the area where production is less than the demand. So if you cannot meet the demand, then you'll have to deal with it as a back order. All right. Okay, so there are some other options to consider. I will let you consider that in the notes. The PowerPoint notes are there, but this is a case where some regular time labor is going to be used along with some subcontracting. All right. And so in this case, we're going to use in-house production of 38 units per day, not the 50, 38. What does that mean? That means that you're actually going to work with fewer workers. So you'll determine what that is in terms of your costs, your total costs, and then subcontract the balance. What's left? 1,488 units you will actually give to a subcontractor, but you will keep your workers constant to produce 38 units per day. All right. So your regular time cost then would be 75,392. Your subcontracting cost would be 29,760, and therefore you have a total cost of 105,152. So just looking at that on the surface there, this seems to be better already, right? But that's just in terms of cost. You have to ask yourself, what's the risk of losing business from subcontracting? And if you figure that, well, there's no risk of losing business because you do have a good relationship with your customers, then you can certainly pursue that strategy. All right. So this is just showing you that what they did was to actually set the production level to the lowest demand, 38. And all the rest was produced by subcontracting. There's another option for supplier plan 3, and in this particular case here, let's see what the option is. We're not told. There should be a page that tells us, but let's just see what they're doing in this particular case. I believe they're allowing for some hiring and firing to happen. So perhaps this is more of a chase strategy. Let's see. It doesn't say in this example here. But we have 900 units. The daily production rate in this case is 41. Then we have 700 units. Daily production rate is 39. 800 units is 38, and so on. So we're using different production rates. All right. Oh, so basically what it is that the production rate, I believe, is simply matching the demand. So you're producing to meet the demand. So it's kind of like a chase strategy. So in the end, you wouldn't have any inventory related costs, but you have to hire workers and lay them off. So if you start with 41 and you went down to 39, you're going to end up laying off some workers. If you then go to 38, you lay off again, and then you go to 57, you're now going to have to hire people. Then you go up to 68, now you're going to have to hire again. 55, you're going to now lower. So if you notice, what's happening here is that we determine the basic production costs for the quantities that we're producing. However, we're going to have to look at the extra cost of increasing production or lowering production. So in this case, the first case, where we lower production, we lowered it by 2, so 2 by $600 for layoffs will give us that cost right here. And then we have to look at, we're laying off one more person. Then again, we have another 1 times 600. Then we go from 38 to 57. That's 19. So now we're going to multiply training costs 300 times 19 to give us 5,700. And then we do the same thing again. We now increase by 11. 11 times 300. Okay. And we get 3,300. So now, given that we have that, we now are going to go back down again by 13, in which case we now have this cost right here of 7,800 for laying off those workers. So if we take all of our hiring and layoff costs, so your hiring costs and layoff costs, this is this was the first one was your hiring cost 9,000, layoff cost 9,600, but then we look at the total, the cost of basic production is 99,200. When we add it all together, we will end up getting 117,800. These values here are basically the sum of, right? So this is a 14,040, sorry. And then if you look here, we are adding the 11,200 to the 1,200 to give us 12,400. So it's really the sum of these three costs that is giving us the cost in the fourth column, right? So now 117,800 is more expensive than the other two that we looked at, and so therefore I don't believe we would actually want to take on that option, all right? So the comparison of the three costs, so you could see now plan number 2 is the most cost efficient option. It certainly was cheaper than the constant workforce and the chase strategy of hiring and laying off workers. So using a fixed number of workers with subcontracting in that case turned out to be the best. All right. So that's kind of what you do. Now, if you wanted to optimize that, you would have to develop a spreadsheet model for it and then use Solver in Excel to actually solve that problem. Let me just talk a bit about aggregate planning in services. So most services use combinations of strategies and mixed plans. Controlling the cost of labor is critical in a service environment. We have what we call facilitating goods. That means the goods that you use in delivering the service. If you're a garage, for example, you may have oil, lubricants, and so on. Sort of bolts, spare parts, etc. These are your facilitating goods. But, really managing the labor is critical. So accurate scheduling of labor hours to ensure quick response to customer demand is important. On-call labor resource to cover unexpected demands. So sometimes you may need to have people on call, but if it's a highly specialized, that might be very difficult. Imagine you're running an auto repair facility. How quickly can you just call a mechanic to come and work for you? Not so easy. Flexibility of individual worker skills. So it all depends on how skilled your workers are, in which case they could, in an area, if there's a service that doesn't require a lot of capacity at this point in time, but one is increasing. So if you think about, for example, a salon where you have barbers and then you have people who are doing hairstylists and so on. But if you have a hairstylist who could also be, cut hair as a barber, then who have the skills in barbering, then if there's a lot more demand in that case and less on the other side, that person can actually be a float person between the two areas. So flexibility of individual worker skills and flexibility in the rate of output or hours of work. We have here that service scenarios. So in restaurants, for example, smoothing the production process, determining the optimal workforce size. Restaurants can be quite tricky. You have very slow periods, and then sometimes you have like crazy periods, like on a Friday evening where most people like to eat out and not. So clearly, this is a case where the restaurateur may have to use part-time employees, so servers. In terms of the kitchen staff, whether or not they increase the capacity of the kitchen staff, when you have busyness, you would have to. I cannot imagine if you triple the number of customers, that if you just have one chef or cook in the back, that you'll be able to meet the demand, appropriately. So of course, you cannot always ramp up the capacity to get the same speed as a slow period. So that's why during the busy periods, you tend to have longer wait times. Hospitals responding to patient demand, national chains of small service firms, planning them at the national level and at the local level as well. You could have miscellaneous services, plan human resource requirements, and manage the demand. In the airline industry, extremely complex planning problem, as I was alluding to earlier about managing the demand and the supply. You have a fixed supply in this case where each aircraft is a fixed number of seats, and you're trying to manage the demand in such a way, either for pricing, that you could match the number of the demand for that flight to the capacity of the plane. And those of you, if you fly often enough and you are looking for airline flights and you watch the pricing, you will notice that there's a strategy, there's a game that's played by the airline. It's called yield management, where if you hang around a long time, yes, you will see a particular price. But if you spend quite some time making the decision, then and you didn't make that decision, you decide I'll come back and take another look. If you did not clear your cache, its chances are the website will recognize you from all the cookies. That the cookie is that if you accepted the cookies, then when it recognizes that you are back again, it may actually do something. Either maybe it drops the price or it increases the price, forcing you to take action because you say, oh my God, the price went up. If I don't buy it now, I might actually end up paying even more. So that happens to force people to make a decision. So sometimes the price hasn't really, they could still offer you the original price, which was cheaper, but they're trying to force you to make a decision. So what you do is you clear your cache, and then you go back again or you go incognito and see what happens. So these are some little tricks that I've learned. So the number of flights, number of passengers on all flights, air and ground personnel at each hub, allocation of seats to fare classes, right? So if they're noticing that a lot of the people that keep coming to the website are not buying the higher price fares, like for example, they put the price in fare classes. If the other fares are not selling, rather than let the plane go empty, they will start to increase the number of seats available at the lower prices to try to sell them off. But they have a way of waiting. They know how long to wait until. And then what they will do is that if you want the flexibility to buy that fare class that gives you flexibility, if you wait too late, you will end up paying a lot more for that one. All right? So the airlines actually play games to maximize their revenue. So we could see aggregate planning in services where you could actually allocate the number of hours for different types of services. So you could see here category of legal business, trial work, legal research, corporate law, etc. So best hours, likely hours, worst hours, maximum demand for personnel, and the number of qualified personnel. So this is a case where you might look at the demand for the kind of personnel and what the labor pool is able to provide in a case like that. So you see in situations where based on the calculations that are done, maximum demand is 3.6 personnel to do trial work, but you have 4 people. So then your capacity is okay. Here you have maximum needed is 9, but then you have 32 available. So then that's cool. But then now maximum need is 16, but you have only 15 available. So then how do you actually deal with that situation? Do you get a lawyer to actually take on an additional case, work overtime, etc.? So in both of these cases here, the demand is actually less than the number of qualified people available. So in this particular situation here, there aren't too many serious problems in that case. All right. So revenue management, let's talk briefly about that. It's allocating resources to customers at prices that will maximize revenue or the yield. Service or product can be sold in advance of consumption, so like an airline seat. You buy your plane fare, your train fare, or you rent a car, although car rental companies allow you to cancel. If you don't show it, there's no costs, and because there's just so much competition. But service or product can be sold in advance. Demand fluctuates significantly. Relatively high fixed resource or capacity. The price of a plane as a fixed capacity is quite high. So the company definitely wants to maximize revenue because, like it or not, that entire plane has to fly between the locations. So it needs to maximize the number of passengers on that flight. And then segmentable demand. The people want to travel business class, the people want to travel economy with no frills, or the people who want flexibility, sometimes like me, who like to be able to cancel without penalty. So you might go for a fare class that allows you to either cancel at a nominal fee or to cancel free of charge. Of course, you pay more for those things. So what we call it, between the different fares, we call this price fences. They're price fences. To go from one to the next, you have to give up something. So you gain something, but you give up something. So if you want to go cheaper, then you give up the free bag, right? And then you might give up the ability to change your flight. So it's non-refundable and things of that nature. So again, these are all designed to maximize revenue. Okay, so this is just an example that shows you that if you don't make the right decisions about based on the pricing and the demand, that is a case where if customers are willing to pay for a higher price, but the price was actually lower, then money is left on the table. Some customers who paid $150 were actually willing to pay more. This is more up here. So that's money left on the table. Some customers, potential customers, exist who are willing to pay more than the $15, right? But not the $150. So in a case like that, that's this group right here. So what this is actually showing us is that when you determine the price that you're charging for something, there's a certain percentage of people who want to pay more, but will get the break that you're offering them. And then you may lose some people who are not willing to pay that amount, but who are willing to pay somewhere in between the lowest price or the cost of the room and the price that you are charging. So you have to set your margin. So the margin here in this case is $135, because you're trying to, this is your cost 15, this is your price $150. So what should we do? Should we do this differently? So if you went like this, right? If you set your price down here, then all of this is what you are leaving on the table, right? And this is what you're then you're passing up a smaller amount. Sorry, let me just remove this. This is so knowing what your variable price is, you could actually determine where you want to set your price. Okay, so let's look at it here. So our variable price is 15. That's fixed. That's given to us. So what if we decide here? So this will be our box now. What is gray is now going to be this shaded region. So if you set your price, I don't know what this is, let's just say $200, then what you will leave on the table is this much. So you leave less on the table, but there's a whole bunch of people. Let me color them in blue. All these people right here who are willing to pay between $15 and $200, but not your price of $200. So you have to find the right balance between those two groups. So to do that, you end up having to use some probabilistic analysis. So what happens now is to lose less money, you start offering multiple prices. So you see here, price 1 for the room, price 2 for the room. So you offer different prices, but then the people who will purchase 100 will not get some benefits that the people who purchase at a 200. That's the same thing with the airline, where you could buy a basic fare, or then you buy the next class up, or flex fare, and the next one and the next one. So you create what you call these price fences, but you don't want to have too many of them because you start to confuse your customer. So you could go here, right? So that's another one. In which case you now have another price, but you have to have a way of differentiating the 100 from maybe a 150 from 200. You have to really understand your demand, your customers. That's what we call market segmentation. Knowing what the different customer groups are, you now start targeting the price to these different customer groups. So this is what yield management or revenue management does, is that it studies the behavior of different customers. You have the people who are no frills, who will just take a backpack and they just want the cheapest possible flight to get them to where they need to go. Then you have those who want a little bit of comfort, who want to be able to choose a seat ahead of time, then they're willing to pay a bit more. Then you have the folks who decide, now I want to be able to cancel any time without worrying about it, then I will be able to pay a bit more. And then the folks who say, no, I want business class, then those folks, definitely can pay a lot more. All right, so that's something to keep in mind, that what yield management does is to study customers and then set prices and fences that makes it difficult for you to just jump from one to the next. Not difficult, it means you have some trade-offs that you have to make, be willing to make. All right. Airlines, hotels, car rental companies, etc. tend to have predictable duration of service and use variable pricing to control availability and revenue. So I've experienced that with car rentals as well. If you book long enough in advance, you get a better rate. If you go to the airport and you're booking on the same day, you'll pay more. So they're trying to encourage you to book ahead of time. That way they could do better planning, because uncertainty in planning actually has major cost implications. So the incentive for the airlines to be able to reduce their costs and optimize capacity to demand is to give you an incentive to make the decision earlier. And so when you make that decision earlier, you will actually do a whole lot better. All right? Okay, great. So movie arenas, performing arts centers, restaurants, golf courses, all of these places that have high capital intensive products that they're offering. And then we are looking at trying to find ways to maximize revenue given the large fixed costs associated with them. And then, of course, multiple pricing structures must be feasible and look logical to the consumer. Forecast for the use and duration of the use, and then managing changes in demand. All of these are important in the management of yield and revenue. So, folks, just aggregate planning is a very crucial part of operations management. And as you saw, that in manufacturing environments, we have a number of choices of balancing capacity and demand, and also in services, we can do much the same.